On the flight deck, listeners are manning up for the podcast launch. It's time for all unnecessary shows to clear the airwaves.
You're listening to the Hangar Bay, a podcast dedicated to the latest military flight simulation and hardware news. From developers to the community and everything in between, the Hangar Bay will get you squared away.
Welcome down to the Hangar Bay, your source for the latest news that every military flight simulation pilot can use for the week of March 9th, 2024. I'm your host, Stumanji, and I'm happy you could join us for another episode of the Hangar Bay. Wherever you are this weekend, I hope you had a wonderful week in the virtual skies. It was a pretty good week for me. I got to jump back into IL-2 and check out the Battle of Normandy expansion. I'd been meaning to do that for a while, and I think the general consensus from that experience is I still have a long way to go with Warbirds in general. That said, on the modern front, I got back into DCS flying the F-18 with the great folks over at the We Run Liberation Group. I've mentioned them before, but always a good time flying with them on one of their weekly missions. That said, I hope you had a great time as well. And here on the Hangar Bay, let's shift over and get things started like we always do with this week's flyby. Now, the flyby is where we aim to cover the highlights from this week's news in 60 seconds or less. Kicking us off this week, we have IL-2, which just announced their spring 2024 sale is live on their web store. So if you've been meaning to pick up a new expansion, collector's aircraft, or campaign for that game, head on over there and check it out. Or if you've already purchased this game on Steam, you might want to hold off a little while longer, as I anticipate we'll likely see the sale go live there once Steam's own spring sale kicks off here in about a week. On the DCS front, Eagle Dynamics revealed in their weekly newsletter that they've had some performance improvements to their terrain engine implemented in the latest patch. Flicon Tech, which is now FC Technologies, I guess, released an updated rendering of their new Throttle. With the latest images, it looks like we're potentially closer to seeing that Throttle release here in the relatively near future. Back to the DCS side of the house, we don't really talk a lot about squadrons, or at least we haven't much up to this point on the show, but an interesting group called the Virtual Weapons Academy announced that they're welcoming new pilots for DCS training, so I wanted to give them a shout out. RJSimTech unveiled a new head-tracking IR camera for OpenTrack users, which is available for purchase on its Etsy store, and then we've got a lot more to come from the community this week. So that was just a few of the bigger stories for the week. I hope you'll stick around for the full show, where we'll cover these stories in more detail, as well as the rest of this week's news. And on that note, let's get things started with the developers.
Hey everyone, Wags here.
In the developer news segment, we bring you the latest happenings from the game developers and related third parties. So starting on the World War II front, one thing I want to highlight this week was Team Fusion's simulations, the developers behind the IL-2 Sturmovik Cliffs of Dover Blitz series and their DLC Desert Wings, released a short, about a minute and a half video, kind of highlighting a lot of the things that they've done in the game over the past few years, but then also what I thought was interesting was teasing a few of the improvements coming our way in 2024. So on the show notes, which I always fail to mention at the start, the show notes, you can always follow along with the notes I'm covering here on the show's website, thehangarbaypod.com. I have blog notes that cover every story we mention in more detail, with links and video descriptions for each of these stories. If you want, you can also follow along with the video version of this podcast on my YouTube page. That's at Stumanji, STEWMANJI. Or you can follow along with the video portion of this show, which is also hosted on Spotify as well. All right, so sorry with that admin out of the way, getting back to Team Fusion. The video they have this week is highlighting some of the improvements coming in 2024. The notable ones that I wrote down for this quick video were VR support, some of the updated 4K textures, which they briefly show us in this video, as well as an overhaul of the channel map, and then finally highlighting the updates coming in their True Sky feature, which is just provide us with some more realistic sunsets, sunrises, and then cloud movement, or so it appears in the video. Anyway, looks really, really exciting. If you were not familiar with the IL-2 Sturmovik Cliffs of Dover Blitz series, give this video a watch. It's just a real quick summary, and then also links to their forum page, which is available at theairtacticalassaultgroup.com. So that's some from Team Fusion. I'm sure we'll have more to follow from them this year as the year moves along. Sticking on the World War II front, as I mentioned in the flyby, IL-2 Spring 2024 sale began. Looks like this, as I mentioned too, the Steam sale should be debuting here in just a week or so. Currently, that spring Steam sale is scheduled to begin on the 14th of March and last through the 21st of March. So if you prefer to pick up your game or the additions to the series over on the Steam site, you just have a few days here to wait. And as a reminder, if you haven't already bought into the IL2 Sturmovik series, you're welcome to buy from both stores, obviously. If you purchase from the IL2 store, giving more of the proceeds to the developers, very similar to DCS with the way the Eagle Dynamics store works as well. But one difference with IL2 as opposed to DCS is if you buy the base game, which is IL2 Sturmovik Battle of Stalingrad on Steam, that essentially serves as the base game. And then you can link your Steam account to the 1C store account, so the official IL2 store. And then no matter what purchases you make for the game after that point, they're all essentially linked together. So that's what I've done, or that's what I did in the past. I purchased Battle of Stalingrad on Steam, and then I can make my future purchases on the IL2 store, or essentially wherever the purchase price is cheaper, and they'll all be linked together. So just wanted to put that PSA out. If you haven't already bought into this series, you're interested in doing that, the linking process of those accounts is very straightforward, just something to keep in mind. And there's lots of great folks, or if you Google that, you'll learn the steps. Very, very easy, make it a pretty seamless process. But so that's a good front. If you hopefully you pick up something new or interesting over there and have a great time with that awesome game. Shifting things over to the DCS front, as I mentioned in the flyby, Eagle Dynamics discussed a terrain engine improvement in their weekly newsletter. And I'll be honest, this went under the radar for me, at least in the latest 2.9.3 patch. I've flown quite a bit since then. I didn't necessarily notice performance improvements, but what Eagle Dynamics mentioned in their newsletter specifically is that that patch introduced a new scenery computation system that achieved their goal of having a more flexible system that can utilize and saturate an increasing number of computer cores and modern GPUs. So they put out a lot of tech speak here, and they have a really interesting chart. And essentially the main takeaway for this, in my mind, is that they've been able to drastically increase the number of objects in the scenery without having a resulting degradation to performance. So they can notably increase the density of sceneries without impacting the overall experience for users. And that they're taking advantage of a lot of the newer graphical hardware to make that a reality. So what they did was just ask for providing them feedback based on your experiences with them, so they can, make sure that this experience is happening for all users across the board. It's not just limited to high-end hardware users. But one thing I thought was interesting that was brought up by Jabbers on Twitter was, is this the first step toward possibly allowing us to see something like a Vietnam map or maps that have a lot more vegetation? I know people have mentioned there's been varying levels of performance for folks who likes to fly on the Marianas map. What you have there is a great example of despite its small size, it's a very dense map in terms of scenery, so it can cause a lot of performance issues for people. So perhaps this kind of technology will really allow ED or third-party partners to really see some substantial improvements in scenery moving forward, and also allow us to tap in some of those maps and settings that we've really wanted to see part of the DCS world for a while now, such as Vietnam map. Anyway, thought that was interesting. Hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about that in the future and what Eagle Dynamics intends to do with that functionality. So that wraps things up from the developer news standpoint. Let's shift over to the hardware news.
Flight controls. Flight controls.
So hardware news is if you can move it, toggle it, push it, or rotate it, hardware news is where we're going to talk about it. And this week, starting things off, we have FC Technologies, which, as I mentioned in the flyby, appears to be the newer name for the former Flicon Tech. They released their updated Throttle rendering. Now, we mentioned this on a previous show when it was just an initial image, but they're back again this time with another image that has a little bit more detail about what's going on their throttle. Now, I'll separate the throttle grip from the base because I think those are two different things that are likely to generate two very different reactions. But if you're looking at the imagery in the show notes right now that I've got for you, as well as a link to the Reddit page, which was over on the HOTAS Reddit subgroup, the one appealing thing I like about this base is there's lots of switches. So it kind of reminds me of the general shape of the Virpil base in that you have rectangular base with lots of toggle switches and momentary buttons and encoder dials. So what we're looking at here is 4 different encoder dials, 4 different LED illuminated toggle switches. So we have on switches, which will mean it'll generate a button press and no matter which direction the switch is toggled, but also have a nice LED light. I'm assuming it'll light up in the up direction, maybe green. It says a red LED, so maybe the red light comes on in the up position and then off in the down position. We'll have to wait and see on that. It does have a covered toggle switch, so useful for something perhaps like a master arm switch. 2 slider potentiometers, which is interesting. That I think that's a first we've seen on the throttle front. We've had some rotary potentiometers, but not necessarily a slider potentiometer, much more like what you'd see on, for example, like a MIDI controller. And then there are 6 on the left-hand side of the throttle momentary toggle switches. So those are on, off, on. So you momentary goes in the up direction, comes back to the center, or momentarily goes down and comes back to the center position. So in total, 10 toggle switches, 4 rotary encoders, 2 sliding potentiometers, and 1 covered toggle switch. I think that's actually a pretty nice amount of switches that you'll have at your disposal, and I really do like the addition of the momentary toggle switches on the left hand of the throttle, left-hand side of the throttle. I'm a big fan of the WinWing-based throttle, despite my earlier customer support issues. Overall, the hardware is still a really nice piece of kit, but one of the bigger complaints I have on it is some of the more useful toggle switches are on that front leading edge of the throttle. So if you're trying to actuate your gear handle or your flaps and you've got that throttle pushed forward on takeoff, it makes it a little hard to get up there and toggle it. I think moving these toggle switches over to the left-hand side is an intriguing option. Obviously, you have to wait and see that in practice, but I think it's an interesting feature. Besides that, they've also shown that there is a 5-position rotary dial. So that's similar to the Virpil hardware in that sense. No indication if that will allow you to change profile or button assignments, increasing your toggle switches to a new button, virtual button, anytime you rotate that, unlocking more power there. So we'll have to wait and see. And then they also have 8 momentary buttons. So this looks very similar to what Virpil has in terms of momentary buttons on their throttle. However, they've grayed out the picture of those momentary buttons. So it's unknown if that's they're trying to hide future functionality that they're going to showcase at a later date. One of the interesting things I speculated about was, wouldn't it be kind of cool if they were buttons a la a Stream Deck, in the sense that they had like a little programmable LED screen on them so you could change the writing that's visible. So we'll have to wait and see on that front. And then in addition to the base itself, we have a flap style switch, and it looks like it's going to come with 3 flap detents. So it looks like there'll be a 3-position, a 5-position, and then it's kind of hard to tell from the last detent, but almost looks like a 10-position flap detent, and that will be to the left of the throttle grip. And then we have the throttle grip itself, which I must admit looks kind of like something out of a space or sci-fi novel or sci-fi movie. This thing in total has 7 8-way hats. That's right, 7 8-way hats with push. It has 2 rotary encoders, and then it looks to have 1 analog mini stick under the index finger. So again, similar to what Virpil has with a push on that axis as well. I think though, to really understand why I think this thing looks like a sci-fi novel, you really out of a sci-fi movie, you have to kind of see it. It's large, and the thumb positioning with some of these rotary dials is interesting. It's got a lot of, I wouldn't say positive feedback from some members of the community. I think it's still interesting. Will I get this? Probably not. But hey, I like seeing new pieces of hardware in the community, new developers trying to do new things. In the end, I think that only serves us, the community, better. Anytime that someone's looking to push the market forward, I think we can only benefit in the end. That said, these are still renderings. We have not seen the final product or the final pictures of the actual hardware. So we'll wait and see what happens then. Either way, still very, very interesting. I think my major takeaway is I wish they weren't 8-way hats. I'm really not a fan of 8-way hats in general. But if you are, let me know. That's one thing I'm always curious about. Do people like 8-way hats? Do you ever use that? I often wish they didn't, because I find myself pushing a hat in a direction that I don't mean to. I really just want to go up, down, left, and right. And then sometimes I'll enter, the up left, up right. I don't actuate the button I really want to. Just kind of makes it a pain. Anyway, so that's the new throttle from FC Technologies. I probably talked about it for way too long, but new hardware is always an interesting subject to me, and hopefully you'll go check it out. Shifting things over to a community member portion of the hardware side, we've got Kodiak Innovations, who's got a Virpil detent for sale on their Etsy store. So I got the link in the show notes. If you're not familiar with Kodiak Innovations, he makes a very interesting combo of gear over there. It's a Virpil detent, so this is designed for your Virpil CM3 throttle. He's got a 1, 2, or 3 position throttle detent, which I utilize for the Vigan multi-stage afterburner. It's a great addition for that. So each time you kind of click it to the next stage of the afterburner, you can actually get that tactile feedback of where the throttle is. He also has a 5, 3, and 0 position adjustable flap lever detent. So if you have the Virpil CM3 throttle, you'll know it's an axis, but you can utilize it as a button, depending on which stage of the axis it's in. He has a nice little detent for you that allows you to have a solid clunk when you actually activate each stage of that detent. So if you utilize the button functionality of the flap lever, you can kind of match that up to his nice detent, and you always know where you are with the flap lever. It's a great addition. Highly recommend it. He also has a flap lever extension that kind of shifts the height of that flap lever up a little higher if you want to be able to access it with your thumb a little bit easier while you're moving your throttle back and forth. And then finally, he has 4 unique toggle switch extensions. So overall, this kit is available for 50% off on his store right now in honor of the upcoming F4E Phantom for DCS. So if you use his coupon code Phantom2024, you get 50% off his set. I actually bought this kit several months back before the sale went live, and I highly recommend it. I think it's a great piece of gear. Kodiak's a fast shipper. You put the order in. I think I had the whole product in less than a week from California to my door here on the East Coast. So great customer service, great store overall. I just want to give him a shout out for the good work he's doing over there. And if you own a Virpil throttle, some of these 3D printed additions might make a great addition to your setup as well. Okay, keeping it in the community, we'll shift it over to RJSimTech. I know I've mentioned RJSimTech as well for making the great Trackstar IR head tracker LED addition to your headset. So if you're using Track IR or Open Track, any type of camera already in your arsenal, you can just add this LED setup to your headset, makes your Track IR setup that much better. Well, he's gone the next step and also introduced his own head tracking IR camera now, which is the IR Cam Deco. So if you already have an LED clip inside your in your setup, but you're looking for a new camera, or your Track IR camera broke, or whatever the case may be, maybe you're just looking to get into head tracking in general, go check out RJSimTech's Etsy page, or sorry, I should say his website, RJSimTech.com. This just released, and it's going to be available for pre-order right now. Now, this current iteration, the Deco version, will have limited supplies. It's going to be at about a 2 to 6 week lead time, but he's hoping this is the first in a series of IR cameras that he's looking to develop. So he also teased out that there'll be an IR Cam Modern, an IR Cam Flight, and an IR Cam Cosmo that will be released in 2024. The important thing to know about the IR Cam Deco, though, is that it is not compatible with Track IR software. So if you want to use this new camera from RJSimTech, you'll need to use OpenTrack software, which he's going to have links to on the store page as well. So anyway, shout out to RJSimTech for unveiling a new addition to the head tracking community. On the community side, so many great vendors in this space, and RJSimTech is definitely one of them, so shout out to him. All right, finally, on the DCS World side, I wanted to highlight MATRIC again one more time. I believe I discussed this, I think it was last week, if not 2 weeks ago. Anyway, for MATRIC, if you're not aware, is a virtual button box of sorts. It allows you to create a software application, or I should say it's an app available on iOS or Android that allows you to utilize a tablet device as a button box of sorts. And the latest news was that they were allowing their MATRIC app to communicate with DCS, specifically DCS-BIOS, so that you could get that intercommunication between the game and your tablet. So if you're running a UFC or a weapon panel or switch panel, you manipulate the switch in-game, you'll actually see that manipulated on your tablet as well. So I mentioned that that functionality was being introduced to MATRIC. Well, the MATRIC developers have gone ahead and created a quick YouTube tutorial to actually walk you through the process of doing that. So if you're interested, the MATRIC software page to learn a little bit more about the app, again, is matricapp.com. And then the MATRIC YouTube page where you can find this video, which I have a link to in the show notes, is youtube.com/TGUDELJ. So probably easier just to go to the show notes and click on it. But again, that's TGUDELJ, or just search for DCS World MATRIC integration. So shout out to the fine folks at MATRIC for all they're doing with their virtual button box setup. And then finally, one of the more interesting things I've seen come along, at least in the 3D printing space this week, was from Thrustmaster of all sources. So Thrustmaster appears to be embracing the modding community of sorts, and they released a 3D printed designs for some of their products over on Printables. So if you're not familiar with Printables, but you do have a 3D printer at home, Printables is a community site for sharing free printable 3D models put on by the folks over at Prusa. Shout out to Prusa, who makes some great 3D printers. Now, this collection from Thrustmaster is still in its early stages, but it contains their own 3D printable models for a variety of their own hardware accessories. So specifically what most of these seem to be focused on currently is desk mounts. So they have a desk mount for their T16000 flight stick, a desk mount for their one of their shifters for some of the more driving sims. They have some TCA accessories for some of their civilian focused throttles, again, desk mount oriented. So maybe not so much focused at the military combat flight simulation side of the house, but I want to at least mention it because it's a great start. And it's something I hope we see more designs from Thrustmaster and then more companies in the combat flight simulation hardware space follow Thrustmaster's lead here. And if they're making their own modifications or they recognize someone in the community doing some great stuff, maybe they can get behind that with their own profile over on Printables to help spread the good word and highlight some of these models. So it's just great to see Thrustmaster embracing the open source modding scene to some degree. So shout out to you, Thrustmaster, for doing that. All right, that concludes things on the hardware front. Let's shift over to the community news segment.
Really not track it, what they're doing exactly.
So community news is where we cover the latest going-ons from the community, from campaigns and mods to servers, software, and everything in between. Starting off this week, we have on the DCS side, Briefing Room Mission Generator. So they just announced that they have a new version, 0.5.403.05. Yep, all the numbers. Needless to say, if you got Briefing Room, you're probably already aware there's an update for it, which mainly just has a couple bug fixes and a little new functionality. But I wanted to use that as an excuse to talk about a DCS Briefing Room and spread the word on it if you're not already aware. So DCS Briefing Room is a great mission generator for those of you who are short on time or just looking for new and interesting ways to get into DCS without a lot of overhead on your from your perspective in terms of setting up new missions. Maybe you've already done all the campaigns and single player missions you have on file. Well, that's where DCS Briefing Room comes in. It's got two main forms. You can download the app and run this locally on your desktop, or you can also use the web browser, which is something that I've done from time to time just because it's so easy. And there are three main ways of generating missions. You can use the quick builder, which think instant action. It'll create a quick mission for you. You just specify what aircraft, what map you want to fly on, and boom, all set. And the nice thing is it actually creates a little bit of a randomized backstory for you. Now, this isn't going to be like an in-depth paid campaign level scenario, but it will provide you some more context than just dumping you in the mission and saying, go bomb this site. It'll actually give you a little bit of a story, which I always find to be an enjoyable thing. You know, nice 15, 20-minute mission, boom, you're in there, you're ready to go flying the mission. Alternatively, you can also do a full builder approach, which think here you're generating all the elements of a single player mission. You can go through multiple tabs and specify what you want at each stage, what you want the weather to be, what you want the enemy to be set up like. You know, this is essentially you're building a full mission without actually being in the mission editor. So think one level above that. And then finally, there's a campaign builder, which I think is a very cool element as well. Now, this is not DCS Liberation full campaign from a developer. It's more simplistic. It's essentially generating a bunch of these quick missions, but connecting them together into a campaign format based off the same settings you specify up front. So if you want to, maybe you want to fly a couple times that night, you don't want to just do one single mission, why not generate a campaign and get 4 or 5 of them connected together, and then you're ready to go. There's a variety of other fun tools provided by DCS Briefing Room. Again, you can find all of this on DCS-briefingroom.com. Got links in the show notes to the GitHub as well as the community Discord where you can learn more about that. But some other fun tools as well are the briefing editor. So you can always import a MIS file from DCS into Briefing Room and edit the briefing to be whatever you want it to be. So you can either load in a mission that you just generated in Briefing Room or take a mission that you already have on hand and edit it any way you see fit. There's also the same thing for the kneeboard editor, so you can edit the in-game kneeboards you'll have for these missions. And then finally, one of the more intriguing options is the situation editor. And this is particularly useful when you're making your own campaigns. So essentially picture a drawing tool of sorts. You have the map for DCS. You can draw on it and actually specify where you want your quote-unquote situation or campaign to be focused. And then this is what it's going to control where that campaign plays out. So if there's one area of the Syria map, for example, that you enjoy playing on, like lately our We Run Liberation campaigns have been based up on the bay around Incirlik on the northern side of that map. Maybe you want to just specify, hey, I want to hang out here and this is where I want to fly. Boom, you hop in, specify that in the situations, you're all set to go fly. Anyway, it's a great tool. I can't recommend it enough. It's been around for a long time. That's DCS Briefing Room Mission Generator, and the website is dcs-briefingroom.com. Continuing on the DCS front, we have some fun helo-centric gameplay on the DCS Enigma Cold War server from Ryu 1940. So if you haven't heard of Ryu 1940, he has a great YouTube channel that's at RYU 1940 over on YouTube. He's just a fantastic content creator, and he's got a special place in my heart because he's focused on the Helo Bubbas, excuse me. That's where a large part of his DCS flying content comes from. He does a lot with the Mi-8. In this particular video I'm highlighting, he's flying the Huey. He's also done a great series on the MH-60R mod for DCS. So if you're not familiar with the Romeo, the Navy's version of the Black Hawk helicopter, generally used for anti-submarine warfare, it's near and dear to my heart as a former SH-60 Bravo pilot. Just fantastic to see what he's doing over there, and really, really cool mod that exists in the DCS scene. So needless to say, Ryu's got a great amount of content over there. He just surpassed 5,000 subscribers as well, so shout out to him. And he actually celebrated with a Discord server of his own, which I got a link to in the show notes. So if you're interested in great helicopter content for DCS, or to some degree Microsoft Flight Simulator, he also flies that as well. Or if you just want to see what he's up to each and every week, especially his fun adventures on the Enigma Cold War server, go give him a follow over on YouTube. But this particular video I thought was interesting to share because it highlighted some helicopter gameplay on the Enigma Cold War server. I mentioned that they had just made some changes to that server last week. Well, this one in particular is about the Caucasus scenario, and he just highlights that there's some cool helicopter-based missions which oil platforms are essentially capturable sea targets. So you fly out there, you offload some special forces troops, they essentially capture the sea platform, and then you can pick them up, take them back to base. And that benefits your side, of course, in the overall campaign with the enemy. I just thought it's a really unique helicopter-centric mission to be conducting in some of these multiplayer servers, and shout out to him for highlighting it as on his channel. Wanted to share that with you fine folks here listening today. Okay, shifting over to the World War II side of the house. Now, this video is intended to be for DCS, but I think it actually is applicable across all of the more older combat flight simulation oriented environments. And that's a video from Dr. Jebus, which is how to navigate in DCS World War II without map markers. So Dr. Jebus over on YouTube, that is JEBUS. So his YouTube page is at Dr. So DR_JEBUS. Makes some great DCS focused content over there where he actually flies through a lot of the campaigns, which I really enjoy. So if you're ever interested in picking up a campaign for DCS, go check him out. And he's got a lot of nice playthroughs for you. But this particular video is focused on how do you navigate on a World War II server or any server where there's no map marker to show player positions. So general or land navigation in the combat flight sim environment doesn't really get talked a lot about, given how many of our modern aircraft in the military flight simulation world have GPS, they have heads-up display. So I kind of found this as a fun and potentially helpful video for folks who are focused on the more retro side of the house. So, and I'll admit, it made me nostalgic for my own days of low-level nav and flight school, where you learn how much you could actually do with just your airspeed, a compass, and a stopwatch, and a chart. And essentially, that's a little bit of what he's doing here, but it's really interesting and hopefully informative for you. So if you find yourself flying on the World War II scene a lot, or flying an aircraft where maybe you don't have access to some more modern navigational methods, this video might be very helpful to you. So give him a follow, go check out his great content over there, and hopefully you'll learn something new. All right, shifting things back to joystick diagrams now. So Joystick Diagrams is another fine group of people I've talked about here on the show before. They just updated patch 2.0.9 of their useful software. So if you're not familiar, Joystick Diagrams, essentially what it does is it mines the templates you've already created in games such as DCS or Star Citizen or any bindings you've made in Joystick Gremlin, and it creates PDF templates of all of the bindings you've done. So if you're like me, you fly multiple aircraft, but you have trouble remembering, man, what did I bind, the third hat switch on my flight stick to for the F-16 as compared to the Viggen? It's been so long since I've flown, I don't know. That's where Joystick Diagrams comes in. Boom, I can just go right to the PDF I've already created for that aircraft. Okay, now I know where all my bindings are. Well, this week's update added a few new templates. So they've got a lot of existing templates for almost 30 different pieces of hardware, from WinWing to VKB to Virpil. Well, they also now added the Thrustmaster Warthog joystick and the Total Controls button box and Apache MPD. So if you're users of that hardware, Joystick Diagrams has got you covered. This is a great piece of software that keeps improving each and every week. You can find them on joystick-diagrams.com. And I got a link to the Discord, yet another Discord. Everybody loves a Discord, in the show notes as well. All right. I mentioned this in the flyby, but I also want to talk about a squadron of sorts. So I mentioned the flyby. Don't normally talk about squadrons. That's potentially something we could do. Highlight the amazing community and groups that are doing fine things in the military flight simulation space. But what stood out to this one and why I wanted to highlight it this week was it's focused on improving the lives of community members and their experience in the DCS scene, which is something I think is fantastic and I always want to highlight. And that group is the Virtual Weapons Academy. So I found this post over on the Hoggit Reddit subgroup. I got a link in the show notes. It says the Virtual Weapons Academy is looking for new members. And they state up front, they don't care if you're brand new to DCS or if you have months or years of experience. They're just looking for any and all pilots who want to get better in DCS. So essentially what they do is they teach pilots via occasional events and missions with partnered squadrons. They teach over 90% of the aircraft in DCS, including warbirds and mod aircraft, and they'll soon teach mission editing and livery creation. So if you ever want to create your own artwork, stay tuned. It looks like they've got you covered. And they even teach aerobatics. So very comprehensive training program that spans a lot of interests in the DCS space. Essentially how they operate is they run 8-week training cycles, and they currently run every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern for North America and at 1300 UTC for the EU folks. However, they made a note that they do offer one-on-one trainings and catch-up trainings if for whatever reason you can't miss some of the weekly sessions. The only requirements they have is that you have to speak English, you have to be mature, and they prefer 16 and up, and then you have to have a flight stick or HOTAS. So fairly basic requirements, I think, for a lot of people who are really interested in taking their DCS skills to the next level. I've got a link to their Discord server in the show notes, but again, that's the Virtual Weapon Academy. You can find them on the Reddit page, on Hoggit, with the link to that post in particular in the show notes as well. So thanks to this great community, I'm going to have to look into a little bit more about what they do. I already joined the Reddit. I think it's a really interesting group. And anytime we have fine folks willing to sacrifice their time to make the community better, I just think that's a great thing, and I want to highlight them here. And then finally, on that note of folks taking some of their time to improve the experiences of others, want to give another shout out to Aviation Plus, who we featured in the past about the fine work he's doing over with Falcon BMS. This is a video that he did right after the start of the new year. So on January 1st, 2024, he released a BMS 2024 starter guide. So that was before I started the show. I'd had this video saved for a while, and this seemed like a perfect week to bring it back. This is a great 7-minute video that essentially covers how do I get started in Falcon BMS. So he quickly covers the controls you'll need, the manuals you're going to need. Yep, that's right. Falcon BMS, you kind of do need to read the manual. It's not all YouTube from here. But where to find the community, and more importantly, the multiplayer crowd if you're interested in that. And then finally, he gives you a small taste of what's to come in the upcoming patch for Falcon BMS, which is 4.38, which includes some of the hotly anticipated graphics updates. I know I've mentioned his channel in general on the show before. He's full of tons of informative Falcon BMS content, DCS content, and simulator content as well. So give him a follow. That's at Aviation Plus over on YouTube. But if you've been on the fence about BMS in general, this is a great 7-minute video just to see if it's something you might be interested in. Highly encourage you to check it out. All right, so that wraps up the community news. Let's get over on the user content of the week now and highlight some fun stuff over there.
They just blew themselves up. They just blew themselves up.
So the user content of the week. Sometimes it's a mission, sometimes it's a tutorial, and sometimes it's just an interesting topic of conversation here in the content of the week. Well, as I tend to do, I say it's going to be a user content of the week. Well, this week it's user contents of the week. We have two similar but different things that I wanted to highlight this week, and that is focused on Simpit building. So it's the Simpit Schoolhouse this week. So the first video we have up is from Simpit Academy on YouTube, and they have a great video about how to use FreeCAD to build your own Simpit panels. So Simpit Academy debuted their channel last month over on YouTube, and it's a series of 9 videos so far. And in general, these are aimed at helping you get started with designing your own custom Simpit panels, which covers how to do the electronics, how to do the computer-aided design, and more importantly, how to make very aircraft-specific designs. Of the 9 videos, 7 are actually focused on making F-15E Strike Eagle-specific panels that walk you through how to design the panel in CAD, how to 3D print that, or if you want to get real fancy, how to use a laser cutter and make panels that way with some acrylic. But it also walks you through in particular how to do the fuel light panel, the ground power panel, the sensor panel. I mean, even though these are very F-15E specific videos, the application itself extends to whatever aircraft you want to do, or a generic panel. If you just want to make your own generic panel that works across any aircraft, this is exactly the kind of tutorial you want to get started with. I've already done a fair amount of this on my own, using some foam board panels as well as some 3D printed panels, but I've still learned some very useful stuff here, and that's at Simpit Academy on YouTube. I think you could also learn some useful stuff as well. So on that note, there's also another YouTube channel called A Hornet's Nest. So Hornet's Nest is doing a very similar thing, except he's focused on the F-18 exclusively. Essentially, this is a series of tutorials focused on building a 1-to-1 scale replica of the F-18C Hornet. So as part of that process, he's walking you through broader topics, though. So he's got videos on how to do Arduinos, how to make those work with DCS-BIOS, how to use LED backlighting in custom panels, how to wire and code potentiometers, how to design your own circuit boards. You know, the list goes on and on. And one video I included, even though a lot of his content this season on his channel has been focused on the F-18, one of his starting videos from this year was focused on how to build the armament panel for the F-5. So essentially, he takes a screenshot from DCS Model Viewer and then walks you through the process of how do you shift that over to AutoCAD, then how to use that to turn it into a printed part, be it a 3D printer or cutting an acrylic panel, attaching the switches, hooking it all up, and boom, you've got your own F-5 armament panel. You know, these kind of tutorials I just think are fantastic. I love when folks take the time to share this stuff with the community. You know, you might not be looking to build a complete replica cockpit, but maybe you want to just experiment and make one box, or there's one panel that you find yourself using all the time. Like if you're like me and you fly the Harrier a lot, I love that manual armament panel, and I'd love to have a replica. Well, this is the kind of stuff that you want to learn how to do that. So again, his YouTube channel is at A Hornet's Nest. And then you can also find his content on Instagram over at A Hornet's Nest. So thanks so much, A Hornet's Nest and Simpit Academy, for the great work you do. Some content I want to shout out this week, and that's why we essentially had our own little Simpit Schoolhouse this week on the content of the week. So that lends itself to a natural transition to the Simpit Spotlight.
You don't see any big stream of flames or smoke coming out, do you?
Now, the Simpit Spotlight is my favorite segment of the show, where we highlight a community member's personal Simpit setup, no matter how simple or complex, to celebrate the joy of flying from home. And this week, I want to give a shout out to someone who I'd like to credit with helping me get started on my own Simpit journey, and that's Guppy. So Guppy has a fantastic blog, which is a treasure trove of information. That's guppy.home.blog. That walks you through his journey of starting out creating essentially his own F-18C cockpit. It's always it's the popular one, right? Lots of folks like to fly the F-18, but I think it similar to a Hornet's Nest in the Simpit Academy. It's not so much about the aircraft. What's fun about his tutorials and his experiences is you just kind of follow through that process of ideating, going through the design space, learning all the ins and outs of electronics, and working with different pieces of software to help make that cockpit a reality. So you can find an incredible backstory on how he built that cockpit. Now, that's quite different than his current version of the setup, but it's still amazing. It was so useful to me, and I want to give Guppy a special shout out. When I was first getting started with setting up my own Simpit, much to my wife's dismay, he was incredible with his time. You know, I sent him an email out of the blue just saying, I have a lot of questions. I'm looking to follow in your footsteps. And he was so generous with his time, so generous with sending me some really detailed emails to help a novice like me. And I'm still grateful to this day. So shout out Guppy. It's just fantastic when we have people like that in our community who are willing to help others. And I think that's a large part of what makes this community such a great place. Anyway, his current version of this cockpit is really what I want to give a shout out for today. And that's just this fantastic cockpit, which really encompasses a lot of different hardware manufacturers. But essentially, he's kind of recreated a more modular version of a F-18 cockpit at home. So he's got a nice flat screen television with, it looks like, about a 24-inch monitor above that. And then he's leveraging the WinWing MFDs and UFC with a nice 3D printed canopy behind it. Also including the WinWing takeoff and control panels, a nice 32 button Stream Deck XL. He's got the OG, the WinWing Super Taurus throttle, that beast of a throttle on his left-hand side. I think the F-18 Thrustmaster grip in the middle, and then also has a Virtual control panel. But what really takes Guppy's setup to the next level, let me step back. I should say this is all built on the Monster Tech frame with the Monster Tech a nice chair. So it's got the Monster Tech chair with the nice, beautiful cutout for the center stick as well in the middle. But as I say, what takes his setup to the next level here, if you're following along in the video or on the show notes, is he also has a desk right next to his cockpit as well that also leverages the Monster Tech sliding setup, if you will. So it's got the sliding mount system where he can basically slide in his throttles, slide out the joystick left and right as he needs to. So when he wants to do desk work, he can push those out of the way, and when he wants to transition back to a side stick and side throttle setup, boom, he's ready to go. And in this setup, he's got, looks like the Thrustmaster F16 A10 stick, the Virtual CM3 throttle, and the Virtual control panel 1 with a beautiful ultra wide monitor. So it's a fantastic setup. I mean, if you're a military flight sim pilot, this is the room you want to be flying in. Shout out to you, Guppy. It's a great collection. And hopefully some of the ideas that you've got here will be useful to other members of the community. That's what it's all about. I always see someone's got an interesting setup, and then I always look at what the next thing I want to add to my own is, and that's when my wallet starts to cry. So it's a fun thing. But that said, let's shift things over to providing some feedback now on the listener feedback portion of the show.
612, departure radio check.
As part of highlighting folks in the Simpit Spotlight or highlighting other members of the community to showcase the great work they're doing, I'd love to hear from you about what you'd like me to talk about, what I might have missed on any given week. So as part of that feedback, you can get in touch with me in a variety of social media sites, whether it be on Instagram or Twitter at the Hangar Bay Pod. I always post links to the shows over there, but you can also welcome me to contact me through those venues as well. You can always find the show on YouTube and message me on the show pages. The YouTube show is at StuManji/podcasts. Again, that's STEWMANJI. The show also has a Facebook page on Facebook.com/HangarBayPod. Or you can contact the show via email the old-fashioned way, feedback@thehangarbaypod.com, or leave a voice message on Spotify as well. I'm always happy to hear from you about what you think the show could be doing better, what you'd like to hear the show focus on. Maybe there's something I'm completely missing, or just a piece of news that you'd like to see highlighted in the weeks to come. Always great to hear from you, because that's what this show is all about, the community. All right, that concludes another episode of the Hangar Bay. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. We'll be back next Saturday, as we always do around here, to get you squared away with the latest military flight simulation and hardware news. But until then, think about what you put out into the community and make it a better place. Fly safe, everyone.
Roger that. Let's go down low on the deck. Unload 500 knots. Let's get out of here.
The missile knows where it is at all times. Oh, I'm sorry. What I meant to say is that you can find the video show on YouTube or on Spotify at the Hangar Bay Pod. The audio show is available on all major podcast providers. You can contact the show via email, feedback at thehangarbaypod.com or on Instagram and Twitter at thehangarbaypod. Show notes and links to everything discussed on this week's show are available at thehangarbaypod.com.